Wow, it's been a fascinating day today. And like everyone else, I really first want to thank Deval and the entire team for being such an incredible force in driving strategic philanthropy in India. I think it really needs to be, they really need to be appreciated given the work that they've been doing over the last 17 years or more now. Since morning, we've heard from all stakeholders, government, corporates, NGOs, who've shared their journeys and experiences. We've reserved the best for the last, as I would say so. We want to focus on the philanthropic capital now and on the philanthropists and try to make this panel engaging and fun. For the next 45 minutes, we plan to focus on discussing the growing philanthropic movement in the country and the expectation and needs of philanthropists and how best NGOs can prepare themselves to benefit from the philanthropic capital. So just before moving into the panel, I'd like to open a quick round of questions for you. There's an audience poll machine which is on each table. I'd like all of you in the audience to answer this question using the polling machine. What's your take on the future for philanthropy in India? Do you expect philanthropy to increase, decrease, remain stable, or don't have any opinion, you can't say? You have about 29 seconds to go. Wow, okay. So 81%. If you look at the Pareto principle, it just outlines the room is really optimistic. And we all, all are impatient optimists at the Gates Foundation. They will spoke about the Bain report, which says that the overall funds for the sector over the last 5 years have grown about 5%, and especially the philanthropic capital has grown at around 20%. So we're really excited about the individual philanthropic movement in the country. With that in mind, we'd like to pivot to the panel and get their thoughts, on what they feel from the philanthropic capital lens and from their own individual philanthropy lens about the sector. So start with you, Ranjit. At what point did you have the realization that you want to venture into philanthropy? And what are some of the contributing factors, that help you create a vision for your philanthropy?
For me, the decision was kind of ready-made. When I sold my companies, I sold them luckily for a huge amount of money, and money we really didn't need, and money my family had no use for, and the money that my family didn't want. So the problem was how to give away the money as quickly as possible. So that was the first contributing factor. I can see Mary Ellen dancing with joy. Okay, the second is I left my business, I sold my business because I wanted to study Indian philosophy. And what I learned after 10 years of academic study and serious study is the outward expression of whatever inward wisdom there is the living a life of compassion and helping people overcome suffering. So obviously it became obvious I had to give away the money, and it had to be for this particular purpose. So I could have easily gone to my friend Deval and said, listen, give me the names of some NGOs, let me write checks. But somehow I said, let me try it myself. So I met a few NGOs, and I recognized that all of them were struggling with the same problems that I had struggled with. Things like, what is my mission? What is my vision? How do I create this organization structure? What kind of processes do I use? What kind of brand positioning should I have? Where do I get my money? Where do I get my money? Where do I get my money? These problems continued to plague them. So I had already been through these problems and overcome them. So I said I can add great value as a friend and as a sounding board to these CEOs. And so these are the three reasons that contributed to creating the vision. And the vision is very simple, is to find and engage very deeply with just 10 NGOs, uh, small and medium-sized NGOs, who are who have these great dreams to grow and have need for funds and have needed for advice from a person like me. I'd be very happy to fund the transformation.
Wow. I think it's really fascinating that you're looking at seed funding and looking at what we would call in the VC world Series A and maybe even prior to Series A. So I'll pivot now to Shloka, to get her sense, given that you've run a volunteering platform over the last couple of years and more. You're now, turning yourself into being much more philanthropic around different areas. What are, the factors that have led to creating your vision for philanthropy and also the movement at Connect for the volunteering platform that you've been engaged with?
Sure. So basically, I moved back to India in 2014 after spending 5 years in America and in England. And when I came back and was given the task of sort of organizing the philanthropy for the Rosie Blue Foundation, I realized what Deval actually mentioned earlier today, that the knowledge vacuum is huge. So for me, priority at that point became doing as much research as I could to understand what are the struggles, what are we aiming to solve, and how do I organize this through the foundation. And while I was doing that, I met with a bunch of different stakeholders. I met NGOs, I met Dasra, who gave me a lot of information. I met people like Louis Miranda, and everyone had a different take in terms of what the problems were. But I think based on my reading and based on my conversations, what became clear is that what we didn't want to do was to engage with anything that was sort of addressing an immediate need. Like if there was a hungry child, our goal was not feeding the hungry child. Our goal was figuring out why are these children hungry and designing something around that. And so we started working with mentorship. We work with an organization called Mentor Together. And from them, I understood a lot in terms of like planning, how to organize things, what is the vision. And also I met a lot of NGOs who I wanted to support, who were doing fabulous work, but they weren't able to translate that work into reality, or they weren't able to provide the kind of reporting that we needed. And that sort of was the genesis of the Connect 4 project, where we realized that India is a country with so much pro bono resource, like any individual has the capacity to volunteer for something, that if we can connect NGOs who need people with certain kinds of expertise. You don't actually need somebody to write an annual report the entire year, but you need an annual report to get funded. So what we decided to do through Connect 4 was essentially to try and enable organizations to reach the kind of potential that they wanted to have using a volunteering platform. And through that, I think what we realized is a lot of organizations start with great intent, but translating that intent into capacity or into effective action is quite challenging. So for us, that became something really important in terms of the philanthropic endeavors that we support and what we do.
Wow. I think just building on that and moving to Lena, you have been just in the process of setting up a foundation and now, analyzing where, which areas and so on. You've outlined that and mentioned in the past that your vision for your philanthropy, that giving is a multiplier. What does this mean for you and how did it come about to be part of your vision?
Right, so just as Shloka did, I did a big sweep of the ecosystem, philanthropy, philanthropists, aggregators, people like Dasra, a lot of mentors in the field. And I quickly realized, similar to what Shloka said, that we don't want to just address the immediate problem. We don't want to put band-aids on little scratches and hurts that you may have, but we would like to address it from the root. And from that end, we looked at the multiplier effect, like I call it. Let me give you an example. I happened to see a rural NGO who provides microfinance for women in Maharashtra. And these are all illiterate women. They are not socially allowed to work out of their home. And it started small, and one woman taking a 10,000 loan, paying it back, taking another 10,000 loan, paying it back, and she's become successful. She's pulled in other female members of her family into this little business that she runs. But the multiplier that I see is in India, where gender issues are so big. I'm looking at one woman being free to live her aspirations, but she's also pulled in 3 other women from her household. So they are free to live their aspirations as well. They are now economically independent. And I'm hoping that leads to their daughters and granddaughters being free forever. But that's not the end of it. What I also saw was 6 other households where other women came in seeing this and decided to take some funding from the same organization. And they're all running little businesses of their own. And that's the kind of effect I would like to see, because any sustained change needs mindsets to evolve in society, and for that to be broad-based. And which is what we are looking at. We are looking at organizations who will work slow, who will work steady, but will change the way people look at their own lives, their environment, and the economy in a manner in which it stays with them forever. So that's what we mean when we say that we are looking at our funding leading to a multiplier effect, if we can say that.
I think all 3 of you outlined very critical points, that philanthropy is actually about solving the root cause of the problem. So all 3 of you are looking to do that. As you went into looking at the root cause for each of the issues, did you have a moment of a lot of information overload? How did you still look at just the critical point to focus on, or to distill the information that was being given to you from all directions? How do you go about solving that information overload paralysis? Ranjit, do you want to talk about that?
Okay, sure. So for me, because I spent an entire year sort of prepping for the research and the eventual steps that I would take, a lot of things started to sound like they were the same. The NGOs were having the same problems, people were giving the same advice, all the research was showing the same patterns. And so for me, distilling the information just became a function of majority. Like, what is the majority issue that most organizations are facing? How can we work to contribute towards that? And then it became about working backwards in terms of, this is what I want to solve, because I've identified that this is the critical challenge that's facing all the organizations. It doesn't matter what cause you're working for, or like what your end goal is, who your beneficiary is. So for me, it just became a question of majority and realizing the pattern, basically.
Any thoughts, Alina?
Yes. For us, we are a family foundation, so there's 3 of us pooling our thoughts at any given point of time. And my children are 25 and 22, and they bring the future to what we do. And they feel very strongly about climate change and the degradation of our environment, especially in our country. And so we actually started as a common platform with that. And while we were working backwards, and we are a family-run organization, we can't change the planet. But we did realize that there is still something we can do. And sometimes drilling down further will lead you to something else altogether. We realized that if you want to work on the environment, the only way we can get agrarian economy that we have to listen to us and make these sustainable changes is to look at their economic prosperity. And if they were not prosperous economically, you could not restore the environment. And so we started looking at how do we do that, we not only strengthen the economies, but we also restore the ecology of a given geography. And so we actually want to go somewhere else, which is to work on the environment, but we are going to have to start with strengthening the economy to begin with, because unless we do that, we won't have the local population take charge of the environment and take responsibility for it and understand that the two go hand in hand and they cannot be prosperous if their environment is not prosperous. So sometimes, you know, you want to go somewhere, but you need to start somewhere else, and that's the kind of discovery we've made in our pursuit of the causes that we are looking at.
Yeah, no, thanks for articulating both your, how did you went to the information load. We've worked with different philanthropists across the world, and that's one common factor we've seen. There's so many causes. Where should I? Where is my best ROI? In funding what? So I think given that you've been doing a lot of research, looking at issues strategically, the root causes, and then also involving your family members in your philanthropic vision. So as we move forward, again going back to the audience and segueing into the second, second objective of the overall discussion. Again, we'll do a quick audience poll, or as we can call it, KBC. Can I have the question on the board? Yeah. How important, given that it's primarily a large majority of the people in the room are NGOs, how important do you feel for NGOs to invest in building the capacity to cater to the emerging philanthropic movement as we articulate? You have another 30 seconds, I think. Oh, wow. So it's, the result, the entire audience primarily is consisting of NGOs, as I understand, and all of you in your own teams believe that building capacity is extremely ornamental to your own growth and the philanthropic movement. So just building on that, getting a philanthropic view on the same question is to you, Ranjit. As you've been engaging and moving further into investing, what are some of the biggest challenges that you feel from your lens that NGOs have in becoming investment ready, given that you are largely looking at the small and the medium-sized NGOs? And what are the kind of selection criteria that you apply while making those investing decisions?
Well, actually, in my mind, the message is very clear that when I address myself specifically to the chief executives and leaders of NGOs today, sitting in the room today, that if you don't want to be marginalized, and if you want to be of any use, if you want your organization to continue in years to come, you have to professionalize your organization starting today, yesterday if possible. And by professionalize, it's such a vague word, But so very quickly, you need to, for example, start with a honest SWOT analysis and find out what your strengths and weaknesses are, what your opportunities and threats are. And in doing this analysis, one of the key things you need to ask yourself, especially the leader and the leadership team, is why do you want to be here? Why do you personally want to grow your organization? And try and recognize the motives behind all your actions. I think this is one of the key things you're going to have to honestly do for yourself. After doing a SWOT analysis, all your analysis can be subsumed under 3 Ps. One is, what is the purpose of your organization? What is the process by which you're going to get to the purpose? And finally, what kind of people do you need now and in the future? But I'm sure somebody else can tell you how to professionalize your organization. But I'd like to end my little contribution here by telling you what is the one thing that I'm going to use in choosing an NGO to support. And that is the integrity and selflessness of the leader of the organization. The leader of the organization may not be brilliant, may not even be extremely well qualified, but must have this quality of integrity and selflessness. And within that, must have one specific subset, which is must have that ability to inspire people, bring meaning and purpose into the lives of the team, and learn to trust and empower people. Without this particular quality, no organization can go from good to great. That's the final acid test I'm going to use in choosing the NGO I want to support.
Thanks, Ranjit. I think you've outlined another 3 Ps, building on the 4 Ps of marketing. I think everyone would have studied during their education days. Moving to you, Shloka, you also mentioned in the past that you feel that majority of giving is actually directed towards the top 50 NGOs. What, in your opinion, can other NGOs do to attract the other group of funders? And what are your thoughts on capacity building on that?
So for me, I think the most important thing is to look at capacity building as an investment. I think it's impossible to attract a donor, no matter how great your intent is, unless you're able to translate that intent into a plan, a strategy. Even if you can't do it, being open to having someone on your team or someone external consult you on the same is really important, because I think it demonstrates what the priorities of an organization are. Am I happy to just be teaching 100 children? Maybe, but then why would I require a funder to help me sustain that 100? A funder is going to look at someone who's looking to grow that 100 into 200, 500, 700, and I need to have an openness to this idea, and B, a willingness to learn for whatever I don't have the capacity for. So I think that for me is really important. A second thing that I think is that typically capacity building is a long-term investment, in the sense that once you adopt a process into the organization, it will continue to serve you year on year. Like once you start recording and managing data, for example, it's not like you're only going to have 1 year's data and then it's going to be a recurring cost for the next year. It's economies of scale eventually, and it's only going to benefit in the long term, because you can show your own growth, your own value. You can convince people using numbers rather than using words. So I think that is very important. And I think the last thing in terms of what NGOs should do to attract donors is to have a plan about where they want to fundraise from. I've seen in the past, and now since I run my own project and we also try and fundraise for that, what we've observed is that it's not very hard to get a meeting somewhere. You can send 100 appeal letters, make cold calls, and people will meet you, but you may waste so much time doing that, and an entire resource is just randomly calling people saying, can I come and meet you, can I come and meet you? Rather, what you need to do is do a little research, try and investigate organizations, families, corporates who you feel align with your mission, and then make it another mission to just approach those. I feel like that conversion is much higher, much more likely to happen, and the benefit of that is a lot of times grants comes with strings attached. Somebody will tell you, but I need you to do it like this, or I need you to do it in this city, or something like that. If you find someone who aligns with your vision, it's much easier to plan out your grant according to the way you want it to happen. So I think investing a little time in investigating who you're approaching and having a defined pitch in terms of what you want out of that meeting contributes significantly to having a successful relationship with a donor.
Yeah, I think it's very interesting that you mentioned about capacity building being long-term in approach. I think Dasra with the Giving Circle had that similar guiding principles. So it's great to see that that movement has further moved on. Just building on that point again, Leena, coming back to you. When you work with NGOs, what are the kind of expectations around outcomes and impact you look at, and then how do you discuss this with an NGO that you are keen to work with? I think that discussion needs to be quite open, but would love to get your opinion, your thoughts on that.
I'm with Shloka when she says that she would like to see a plan. So I kind of approach philanthropy the same way I look at business. So if we were to back an entrepreneur, we would back his belief in his product, his ability to build a team which manages resources optimally, and we would look at the plan that he had, for the next 3 years or 5 years. So that's essentially, I think, the entrepreneur and his strengths and the plan of the NGO are the two key things we would look at. And look at how they're looking to scale. But for me, scale is not everything. If the impact is solid and sustained and permanent, I feel there are several causes for which scale is not applicable. But having said that, I think the entrepreneur and the plan and the teams and the openness to ideas, like Shloka mentioned, I think these are the 3 or 4 key ingredients that we would be looking for.
I think one thing which is common across the 3 illustrious philanthropists that we have with us is they're all quite strategic in how they're going about it. So I think the days of check writing, we're moving beyond those days and getting much more strategic in our thinking and being open to transparent to talk with NGOs around that. I think one last question before we open it up to the audience is a slightly more a more question just to get your insights on what is one aha moment in your philanthropy or your journey till date that you would like to share with the audience, one story or whatever moment you feel that wow, any stories which you want to share or any thoughts which you have on that.
Well, the aha moment came is when, I suddenly realized that there is a conduit to give the money to. And I said, well, I have the solution to my problem. That was the aha moment to me.
For me, the aha moment was when I was debating an NGO that I really wanted to support, but that didn't have the kind of reporting structure that you would accept. And my dad at that time told me that just because the NGO is not ready for your support right now and in the way that you want it to be, doesn't mean that you can't help it to get there. And for me, that was a huge moment because I realized there's an entire step in enabling organizations who you believe in to be ready to receive the kind of funding support that they need.
For you, Lena?
For me, actually, it's a little negative experience, if I can call it that. I was on a field visit, visiting a marginalized community whose entire struggle was to get identity papers for them. And I'd seen a whole lot of causes, a whole lot of movements, NGOs, and at the end of the day, I realized you can make a cause out of something if you recognize it's there. These people did not belong in our country officially. They had no papers, they were on no records, and they were quite a forgotten bunch of people, a few thousand people, few tens of thousand people in a little hamlet in Maharashtra who did not exist in our country, officially did not exist. And that kind of shook my soul that night, and I realized that there's a lot of big ticket causes that we do look at. And as he mentioned earlier, Ranjit mentioned earlier, there are, and she did too, that there are a lot of causes which are out there. There are 50 causes, 100 causes, some very big NGOs, but there are also these forgotten people, forgotten causes, things which are really small but very disturbing, which need to be addressed. And from that visit, I think I've been a little more open to finding those little areas which all of us forgot about. And everybody has the right to live with equal dignity. And some of the work we do is to focus on these little pockets we find in places which go largely unaddressed. So that was an aha moment for me, because I like Deval said in my introduction, I have been studying the space and I'm at a lot of events, and I usually see what everybody usually sees, and most of the common themes which move all of us. But 1 or 2 field experiences did opened my eyes to another dimension of philanthropy altogether.
Yeah, I think it's very interesting to know that you've looked at the macro issues as well as those micro issues which have moved you in different areas. Our vision at the Gates Foundation is that all lives have equal value, and I resonate with some of the thoughts that you shared with us. We'd like to now open to the audience, and just before we do that, we have a very special guest who will join us on stage too. Can I request Deval to come on stage also? And in the meanwhile, while Deval is walking up, we'd like to see, can I see a show of hands anywhere for any questions from anyone? We have mics all over the room. Yeah, Deval, you want to add something before that?
Yeah, so I think this is a good example of the knowledge vacuum that exists. These are three individuals who are looking to get engaged in the sector, are looking to get involved, I think have phenomenal experiences in what they've done in the past and are trying to figure out ways on how to maneuver their time, their wealth, their intent to create greater value and greater impact. And I think, and perhaps some of the questions were phrased in a negative manner that were on the screen. I don't think any of us are sitting here, especially not Dasra, saying that you need to change the way you operate for donors. I think the crux is we need to change the way we operate to create greater impact for the lives that we're all here to serve. In that process, there are systems that can perhaps be used that are more prevalent in scaled companies and organizations. But at the same time, I don't think it's sustainable, honestly, if we're doing it for the donor, regardless of where that donor sits. It has to really be with intent of impacting lives on the ground and increasing that impact. And it is a journey, though. And I think what, again, is not talked about is when 10,000 to 15,000 crores sort of vanish from the development sector, and the knowledge that those individuals and organizations and experience they've had in building some of the strongest movements in the country sort of are no longer there, I think that's really the question of how do we then bridge that divide, how do we find a place of humility and partnership, and how do we learn from each other, because I think that's critical for us as a society, I think, to achieve the sustainable development goals that we all care deeply about.
Yeah, I mean, I think we totally agree with you as the co-panelists here on the importance of capacity building and systems for the larger interest and not for a particular segment of stakeholder, because it's actually about being sustainable and achieving the SDGs like they were articulated. With that, moving again back, a quick round of Q&A. Any questions anyone would like to ask the three panelists here? We have two rounds of first with ma'am in the middle and then to the front.
Hi, I'm Sumati. I just wanted to understand if there are any tips how NGOs can tap into this philanthropic donation by individuals. We know how to proceed with the institutions. There are RFPs, there are call for proposals, and there are certain processes. Whereas for getting approaching individuals who would like to donate, what are the channels that NGOs can look at? Is it only references, or are there any other formal channels?
Sorry, I couldn't hear your question. If you could repeat it, please.
So I come from an NGO which is very technology focused. When we apply for funding, it is usually call for proposals, RFPs that we respond to, and that is how we send out proposals. Whereas, how do we tap into, say, if I want to receive money from a private foundation or an individual, how do I know that they are open for receiving proposals? How do I approach? How do I put forth, pitch the idea and get the funding? Is there a formal process?
So let Mr. Moneyman handle the question.
Thank you.
Well, I think, and this is an issue, honestly, with the current giving and with foundations, even corporates, there is no public data existing out there, right? I think GuideStar's done phenomenal work in terms of trying to get more NGO balance sheets onto a public domain and platform. To be honest with you, that same rigor or question has not come for foundations yet. And so there is a lack of information on how to approach private philanthropists. I think what we've, I guess, done over the years at Thusra at least was, is sort of attend gatherings like this. People who come are people who are interested, engaging givers. I think if you're based, I think in Bangalore, for example, there are sort of more private wealth institutions as well as IIMs and academic institutions, excuse me, that are hosting gatherings on sort of giving. I mean, Lena, again, attends many of them. The Indian School of Development Management puts them on, et cetera. And so I do think if you just attend these, and I think it's also real, I mean, don't sort of be a vulture and go in and be like, I need money. But I think it's also the investment that we as NGOs make in helping communities that we're serving change generations of behavioral change. That same sort of patience is required, honestly, in working with givers and just helping them understand the landscape, getting them get to know where they can be valuable, in this case, technology, how they can play a bigger role. But it is a long-term bet. And I think that's just an area that where the world is going, we have to invest in for these sustainable partnerships to be created.
There was a question in the center row first, and then the first table, and then back.
Hi, I'm Neelam Shirsagar from Impact India Foundation. And my question really is a very personal one for Mr. Ranjit Malkani. While Shloka said she's in the volunteering sector, supports that, and Leena has talked about livelihood generation. What exactly does Ranjit, that your profile doesn't tell us? Is there an opportunity for us, for Impact India?
I really couldn't hear you again.
I think the question she's looking to
echo here.
Yeah,
what kind of sector do you support?
Okay. I'm completely sector agnostic.
Then we maybe have a meeting with you.
That was a short.
I'll meet you.
I think Ranjit outlined that he's looking for, small or mid-sized NGOs and the guiding principles, which he articulated. So I think to the front row, right here.
Hi, I'm Lynn Smitham from the Kiewa Trust. The question that we were polled on as an audience was how important is it for not-for-profit organisations to think about and put effort into capacity building? I think I'd like to have seen the question more directed to philanthropists, because in my experience, it's actually, the problem is that there's not much funding or motivation from philanthropists to fund those sorts of activities. So I'd love to hear from the panel what, in your view, organisations need to do to get philanthropists interested in funding capacity building.
When I used to sit on a board as a chairman, and we were doing all kinds of CSR activities or any activity, I would receive all my financial results in what is known as an executive summary. And the summary always had last year's results and this year's results, Y on Y, Q on Q. And the most important thing is I wanted to see an improvement in that particular result. So when you're sitting at and receiving money from large funds and large CSR, their approach is always going to be is that last year you spent 30,000 rupees per child that you were supporting. This year it should be more children, but each child should be 29,000, and so on. This is a standard top-down thinking based on this false notion of productivity. So you're always going to have a problem when you deal with large organizations. But as far as my little endeavor goes, the only thing I want to fund is risk-taking and capacity building at the institutional level. I'm program agnostic. I don't care what you do, as long as you're helping overcome suffering. I'm quite happy, and if you have a great dream, and if you have the leadership, and you have a clarity of process, and you're a people's person, I'm very happy to support your capacity building and pay for all your transformation costs.
I just want to add to that a little bit. I think it's amazing that Mr. Malkani is so open to so many different things. But I think in order to sort of attract other philanthropists to invest in capacity building, the important thing is to demonstrate kind of what Lena said in terms of a multiplier effect and show really how investing in capacity building has the potential to, at the end of the day, increase impact or affect impact so dramatically. And for us, we see it on a daily basis because if you find a volunteer to, say, design a brochure or do your social media, suddenly your traction at an NGO is significantly greater. And you can see that just by building that capacity in an organization, the ultimate result for the organization is almost 5 or 7x what it could have been without, if they had just continued their day-to-day. And then I think using case studies like that and examples like that, which we have in the sector, we can see around us when you show like changing my website led to this growth, or investing in this person led to this growth, or whatever. That is really how you convince someone to invest in your capacity, because it gives you the ability to create more impact, and at the end of the day, that's what everyone's investing in.
Yeah, I think there's a recognition with all the philanthropists here, at least, that capacity building is a really critical issue from their lens, and they would like to invest, in that area.
If I can just continue from there to answer your question, is unfortunately the only problem here is that while doing this transformational change, or what is known as capacity building, there is an element of risk because you could fail that particular initiative. For example, if you want to expand for some very good reason and you don't know where to expand or in what product line to expand, or in which particular market to expand, you may want to do a pilot, and that pilot is subject to failure. So now you must find those kind of NGOs or those kind of funders who will support this kind of risk-taking ability. That's number one. And secondly, someone who will see you through the transformation process between 3 and 5 years, because transformation and capacity building does not happen in 1 year.
There's one question at the right. Yeah, those were the last two questions, I think. We're out of time.
Hi, Mary Ellen from Atma. I wanted to ask from this panel's opinion, in what way can organizations use their boards to strategically grow their organizations and create more impact and raise more funds and grow as organizations?
Using boards?
That's a large question, but is your question is how to grow and create impact? Is that your question? How do you build your?
Board, your governance, your board.
Okay. Again, this is not something that happens overnight. And you must begin really with what is the reason why you want to grow. And unless you have a tremendously good reason, you should preferably not grow. But you should definitely have one, each NGO here should have one clear imperative that they should do almost immediately, because the founder, the chief executive officer, and the chief trustee should not be the same person. And that's generally what happens at the beginning. The founder, the chief executive, and the chief trustee is the same person. You have to divorce management from control. Control must be with the trustee board, and management must be with the executive board, that is the chief executive and executive board. That's the first step. The question is, if the chief executive is responsible to appoint the trustees, then the trustees are not going to be able to control the chief executive. So it's a very complex process, and this is your first test of becoming a professional. Are you prepared to nominate people onto your trustee board who are going to be friends but critics, not necessarily rubber stamps to what you do? And once this is in place, that your checks and balances are in place, you will find and the other very important thing is, when you have this CEO, trustee, founder, all in one, that person is not accountable for anything, has no goals, can do anything, can create any kind of excuse for not having achieved targets and so on and so forth. The defining of goals and the achievement of those goals and taking accountability for those goals must become the next step that you do. And everything will flow out of that.
I think there's one last question from the table on the right.
Hello. So I just want to understand what actually motivated to be a philanthropist. What actually motivated you guys to be a philanthropist, and you know, how was the experience for the self-transformation to decide, okay, we want to give it out?
I'll take that first. Like Ranjit said, we also exited a business, and there were at that point way too many zeros than we need. And our first thought as a family was that we need to start giving it away. A lot of philanthropists have their hearts in the right place, but it's few of us who may have liquidated, who actually have the money to give out. The rest of us are constrained by our annual incomes and a good year and a bad year in what we can do, right? But in India, we have a very deep culture of giving, and a lot of us in an era now where exits are common, where there's mergers, acquisitions, where a lot of family businesses are now encashing some of those business assets that they have, you will find more and more philanthropists coming in. The natural choice is to not enjoy all the fruits of what your forefather earned, but to actually give it away, and each of us goes about it in a different manner. But I know an umpteen number of people who would gladly give more, given the right circumstances. And if there is a good NGO with a good plan and a good team saying the right things, I truly believe that you can turn somebody who's not a philanthropist into a philanthropist just by the strength of your story and on the strength of what you plan to do.
Yeah, I just want to add to that because obviously I'm not a philanthropist of my own money. So basically I'm a next-gen philanthropist. And for me, I think the most important thing is that I know that the money that I'm investing or choosing to invest is money that my family has really worked hard for. And for me, the priority is to make sure that the value of that money, it's great. We have a tradition of giving in my family, like there's a long history of people doing charitable things. But I think when, as a next-gen philanthropist, you take responsibility for that, the importance is what is your social return on investment, because that's what you want to go back to whoever's made the money and kind of say that, look, in whatever you did, this is what we are able to achieve, and that's really where the value is. For me, it's that.
I think with that, we're out of time. Any questions further could be, you could reach out to the philanthropist still in the room. Thanks so much again, Leena, Shloka, Ranjit, and Deval, for hearing your thoughts and insights. And thank you, everyone, for being such a fantastic audience. This has been the last panel for the day, but we appreciate that you being, with all your energy, asking questions and being around. Thank you so much.
And if I could just say thanks to Deval for doing this for us and giving us this platform to share our ideas with you. Thank you. Thank you, Deval.